And again, another induction method you haven't heard of from at least these 2 days, flotation-REST. And so what I want to do in my talk, I have 3 steps. I first want to talk about my basic research on time perception, and wanted to convince you that when we talk about time perception, it's all about embodied time. Yeah? So I will talk about how the body informs us about the passage of time. We'll talk about waiting time, flow states, psychophysiological research. But I'm not just doing this to show you my research I have done in this field, but because it's essential for understanding altered states of consciousness. Because altered states of consciousness, as I want to claim, is it's all about losing the sense of time and bodily self. And I will show you this other induction method, flotation-REST, and our study research, which is ongoing since 2022. And in the end, I will contextualize everything I will have shown to give you an overall view of my opinion. So what I will be talking about is all related to these 2 sentences, yeah, that the bodily self-consciousness and time consciousness are together up and down modulated. So if we have an intensified awareness of the bodily self, we also have an intensified awareness of time, and a weakened awareness of bodily self leads to a weakened awareness time. So in everyday experience, we know all this about with boredom, waiting time. So if you look at this picture above, yeah, this is from the Wikipedia website of boredom, yeah, and you just see it's all about intensive, negatively felt over-representation of time and self. So time drags. But in flow states, during pleasant activities, we are absorbed in activities, yeah, and we have an under-representation of time and self, yeah, and time flies. So we did a study at our institute where we wanted to basically upregulate attention to time and the arousal levels. So this is a real waiting task with a cover story, and people came, we took away their cell phones and watches, books, anything, and they were just there for 7.5 minutes, nothing to distract them. And they waited for something. They thought they were waiting for something, but actually we were then coming and asking them about their experience during that waiting time. And it's very clear, so not surprising, but we quantified it maybe for the first time. So the stronger the sense of self, the more thoughts about time, more boredom, the longer subjective duration, and the slower the passage of time. The other contrasting experience is the flow state. So in the definition of Csikszentmihalyi, the components of flow experiences are the intense and focused concentration on the present moment, a loss of reflective self-consciousness, and the distortion of temporal experiences. And in peak experience states, it's very often about a loss of the time sense. And we did a little study with the game Thumper in VR, and people played it, and then we asked about subjective self and time, and we had a flow questionnaire, and it was very clear, the more flow experienced for the subject, the faster time passed for this 25 minutes video game. So going to the brain results. So that was my studies at UCSD in San Diego. So very clearly in a time perception task, what we were showing, while people had to judge duration, that there was an increased activity in the posterior insula with increasing duration, yeah? As if there was a build-up of duration representation over time in the posterior insula. So posterior insula is the primary interoceptive body cortex. So that leads us to the hypothesis that it's all about the embodiment of time, that the sensory signals from the body code for the passage of time and this estimation of duration. And you could say, okay, this is just this one study here, but now in 2023 I hadn't to do anything, but there were 2 independent meta-analyses with over 100 fMRI studies, and these were from 2 independent groups. I think they didn't even knew about each other, and they basically came to the conclusion that there's only 2 basically hubs left in the brain which are related to time perception, and one is the supplementary motor area, which is probably related to sensory motor timing, and the bilateral insula, so where I would say, okay, that's all about interoceptive time perception. Interesting also, the insula was activated across all time intervals. So there's only region activated across all time intervals from milliseconds to multiple seconds. And then there's a lot of research now going on, but I'm just highlighting a few relating to this idea of insula, interoception, and subjective time. So subjective body awareness in one study from a Rome group with a questionnaire assessed predicts timing accuracy. We have it with lesion studies that there are timing impairments with lesions in the insula. Then the heart rate predicts subjective duration, and the heart rate evoke potential is the first one. Koshnoot is a study we did at my institute. Also predicts timing accuracy, so meaning the heart rate as recorded in the brain, the heart rate evoke potential, predicts timing accuracy. So that's a basic background. Time and bodily self are connected. Now we're switching to altered states of consciousness. And so if you look at other induction methods, meditation, we have heard something by Antoine Lutz. So this is a quote from a really experienced meditator with over 50,000 hours of meditation experience. And in a discussion, in an interview, he said, "The timeless awareness during meditation is an awakening. It has no beginning and no end. This timeless time is an immersion into a being where no comparing happens. It is timeless presence without the sense of an I, without observer, perception and perceiver one." So this is this non-dual awareness where also time is absolutely downregulated. Here, a little distortion of the picture, but this is Benny Shannon, basically, who has worked a lot with ayahuasca. And what you see here, if you look at different parameters and temporalities, so you have different modified temporalities under the influence for ayahuasca, but what he basically then says is that in peak states, there's no sense of time and self. Now, you could say, okay, these are just little anecdotal things, but now here is an overview which Larry Ford and Timo Schmidt, who just talked, were basically leading. And what we did was analyzing the key features across state-based classification schemes, and we extracted what are the most important components of the experience of altered states of consciousness. And bodily sense, self-boundary, and time sense are among them. Yeah? So this is basically also a more objective evaluation. So next step, I will now talk until the end about my induction method I'm interested in, that's flotation-REST. So REST stands for Restricted Environmental Stimulus Technique, or therapy if it's with patients. And so you float in water at body skin temperature, 35 degrees, which is saturated with Epsom salt. And there's no stimulation through external senses, so there's no light, no sound. And the initial experience is you have actually an increased time awareness, maybe through increased interoception, because of course external stimulation is shut down, and you feel much your own interoception, your own bodily self. But later during the float, you get a loss of sense of self and time. It's just anecdotal. And this very much relates, that's very similar to meditation, you could say, because at the beginning of a meditation session, let's say you're doing your body scan, you're breathing in and out, you're very much aware of your body. But later on, especially when you're an experienced meditator, you also lose your sense of self and time. And that's why I like to call this instant meditation, because you easily get into relaxation states, and you also at some point get decreased mind wandering, and you're just there with yourself. And the study I'm now presenting with the doctoral thesis of Helena Ruby, which was a very first study we conducted mapping subjective experience in flotation-REST. And so this is a study design and setting. So we had 50 healthy volunteers, with two experimental conditions. One is for floating rest, and the control condition was bed rest. Why did we do a bed rest? Because, of course, you could always say, or people actually have said that, oh, well, if I'm at home in my cozy bed, I've shut down the lights and it's quiet, and have the blanket over me, oh, that's also so nice, why would I need an expensive flotation tank? So we need this as a control condition, classic experimental design to show that the effects of flotation-REST are specific to this induction method, and not just because you're lying horizontal in a dark room and also you don't hear anything. So that was our control condition, and the experimental condition was a cabin for two, so it's really a big flotation cabin where you can float effortlessly with no light, no noise. So it's magnesium sulfate, this is Epsom salt. And first session, important to have a familiarization, 30 minutes, just to get this experience, what it is all about. So an orientation, so it's not this novelty effect goes away later. And then we had a second and third session, 1 week in between, with flotation-REST and bed rest, and then for 60 minutes each, and then having a couple of questionnaires. All about affective states, really mapping for the first time in healthy individuals experience in flotation-REST. So affective states, relaxation, stress, fatigue, anxiety, before and after. But also then going into altered states, and we chose the phenomenology of consciousness inventory for this. Then looking at bodily self, the feeling of bodily self. I'll show you the picture in a minute, what it's all about, and about subjective time with visual analog scales. And hereby, this is a scale developed by Dambrun from Clermont-Ferrand, which was validated for meditators, and we use it for the first time now also for flotation-REST, where you see it's all about how the body boundaries dissolve from right, very clear body boundaries, to the left and less clear body boundaries. So to the results. So first of all, those critics who said, oh, in my bed it's just as cozy as anywhere, they are to some extent right, because if you look at the right, the orange, yellow is bed rest, blue is flotation-REST. Before, after, what we show that in both conditions, you have a reduction in arousal, anxiety, tension, and stress, significant reduction. But then there's also differences between the conditions. Yeah? And then in flotation-REST, we had people who had a less anxiety, less tension, and less fatigue, or you could say a bigger reduction in anxiety and tension, plus also less fatigue. That's also interesting because similar to meditation, you could also say, okay, in flotation-REST you fall asleep. But no, actually in bed rest you are more fatigued than in flotation-REST, and this is also similar to meditation, where you're actually in a very alert state and still in a relaxed state. And then now to the altered states of consciousness. First of all, so the visual analog scale, did you lose your sense of time during flotation or resting? Yeah, not at all, too extremely. And then our body boundary scale. And we were very clear there was more time distortion in flotation-REST and more loss of body boundaries in flotation. So, but has this something to do with altered states of consciousness? So relating this, correlating this with this PCI, and there are two subdimensions in the PCI, the altered experience and the altered state, which relate to these altered states of consciousness, and we found this small correlation with time distortion, yeah, so the more altered experience, the more time distortion, and quite medium effects with the dissolution of body boundaries, yeah, so the more altered stage, the less body boundaries. Next step, doing a mediation analysis. So we looked at, maybe the body boundaries is a mediation for the output of the other conditions, and we showed that body boundaries mediates the effect between flotation-REST versus bed rest to anxiety. Yeah? So people have less anxiety in flotation-REST and bed rest that we knew before, but this is mediated through the loss of body boundaries. And so this is quite interesting. If you think now about the psychiatric context, yeah, maybe then the dissolution of body boundaries is some sort of basically a mechanism for an anxiety reduction, which one finds, for example, in psychedelic research. Okay, so a short recap for in between. So bed rest, which we used here, I think is the strongest control condition to date in this basic research on flotation-REST. And both flotation and bed rest decrease anxiety, tension, stress. They both leads to relaxation. But in flotation rest, we have less fatigue, less anxiety, less tension, or stronger anxiety reduction, stronger tension reduction. And we also find the altered states of consciousness we did not find in bed rest, so with weaker body boundaries and more time distortion. And this anxiety, as reduced through the weaker body boundaries, is maybe a novel mechanism by which floating may exert an anxiolytic effect. And this brings us a little bit into the context of where altered states of consciousness in psychedelics, but also in other induction methods, meditation is used to treat psychiatric syndromes. And so if you wanted to really integrate all this information known, is that in psychiatric symptoms like depression, anxiety, what you have is a hyper-awareness of self and time and a loss of connection to other people in the world. Yeah? So if you do interviews for Kai Vogelei in Köln with David Vogel together, people with depression report they're stuck in the present moment, time drags, the future is far away, so time is really of essence. And of course, they have this super self-awareness of this negative self-awareness. And the key features or core features of ASC during flotation are then antithetical to these symptoms. Yeah? So you have a loss of self-boundaries, a distortion of time. Yeah? So maybe through this, you could even say this loss of self-boundaries, yeah, maybe this opens you up for connection to other people and the world. Yeah? That would be, of course, figuratively, but maybe this is a potential mechanism. And this is my friend Justin Feinstein at Tulsa, Oklahoma. They showed this first really systematic study with patients with anxiety and how the anxiety symptoms were reduced through flotation rest. Okay, now this was the state of flotation. Now I will just move on because that's a classic experience after flotation. You just feel really different. Something is different. You feel calmer. Of course, you feel relaxed, but also you feel, oh, mind wandering has gone down. Yeah. So we wanted to systematically study this afterglow effect. So afterglow, of course, relates to psychedelics experience, but we just termed it, and we also used now an afterglow questionnaire. And we had 34 healthy subjects, very similar design as I just showed you. But this time we concentrated on the time afterwards. Yeah? And what was the time afterwards? So showering, getting dressed, entering the anteroom, that's already time passing. Then we had a waiting phase, so people would be 10 minutes alone in this anteroom, undisturbed, and could reflect and experience themselves. And then we had 5 scales for this, assessing this after experience. And interesting here, because we also had the bed rest condition, of course, we already anticipated reviewer comments. If we hadn't had people showering after the bed rest, they would have said, yeah, maybe this effect is just because people showered after flotation rest. So it was a little odd situation. People also after bed rest had to shower, but which also helped us to have the same time constraints before we would apply the scales, which were on average 26 minutes applied after they had been exposed to these conditions. So there's this afterglow inventory, basically constructed by the Berlin group. Timo Schmidt is one of the authors, and you just have a look at some of these items, 24 items, which was constructed for the psychedelic research, and we used it also, except one dimension which was related to nature experience, because of course in the flotation rest, in this anteroom, there was no nature experience, so we just excluded these items, this subdomain, but otherwise we used this afterglow inventory. But we also used other inventories, and what you see is, first of all, in flotation rest, stronger afterglow effect than bed rest. And we showed also that people are more mindful after flotation than after bed rest. And also they have an increase in interoceptive awareness related to an adaptation of the Maya as related to bed rest. So our interpretation is, therefore, that the float experience, relaxation, altered states of consciousness, you could compare to deep meditative states. That's what I call instant meditation. But the afterglow is more, with this psychedelic afterglow, more mindfulness, higher interoceptive awareness, is more comparable to mindfulness, the state of mindfulness, me being here, feeling yourself intensely. So meditative states in the float, altered states of consciousness, afterwards more the state of mindfulness. Okay, now I think I'm now finished nearly. So the outlook would be, we have neural correlates, would be interesting to look at what happens. There's one fMRI study after versus before flotation. So also the Tulsa group in Oklahoma was not able, similar to Timo, to put the flotation tag in the scanner. But what they showed before, after, and also relative to a control condition, which was similar to the bed rest condition, that there was a reduction of default mode network, interpreted as maybe a reduction of narrative self, and the posterior insula interpreted maybe as the bodily self-representation. So neural correlates is of course interesting, and what one could use, and there's a pilot study going on with fNIRS, because fNIRS uses light, so you don't have all the problems that we would have with EEG. You could have like something on the forehead, to measuring EEG, but fNIRS would be you could even have a whole cap. Now, how else can you use flotation-REST, for example, in combination with psychotherapy? And then this has been shown in Annette Kjellgren from Karlstad in Sweden. She did for 20 years extensive research in flotation-REST with patients also. And she showed that it opens up. So you have if you do first a flotation-REST session and then have a therapeutic process, psychotherapeutic process afterwards, it opens up this individual for the psychotherapeutic process. So flotation-REST also could then be, or you could use flotation-REST as a preparation for the therapeutic psychedelic session, because if you never experience psychedelics, and then you're depressed, you're going, and then you suddenly have for the first time this experience, maybe you could have some steps before. There could be flicker fusion or something, or flotation-REST to prepare people for some extraordinary states. So, or it could also be a low-risk alternative for psychedelics. And why not instant? If it is really instant meditation, so you don't have to meditate for thousands of hours to get into deep altered states of consciousness, just in meditation. But maybe we can have a float rest program like the MBSR programs. So this is the contextualizing of everything. I want to suggest you flotation rest as an alternative method for inducing altered states. And here is just a link to the sponsors. Thank you for listening.